Welcome everyone. I am so excited to introduce my dear friend, an amazing artist, ceramicist, sculptor, and the cutest freaking Artpop Tart there ever was.
Yes.
Clara Titus, girl, thank you so much for coming on the pod today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so honored that you think I have something worth saying and listening to.
Well, girl, we did not go through capstone for me to just be like, bye, bitch, like, we're done. That's not how capstone works.
That was a wild ride. Capstone was like 3 classes in one, I felt like. And it
Wild
was like
ride.
an insane semester. Like, so that wasn't your last semester. You didn't have your show up yet, but like you
Yeah.
were moving towards your show, but whew, yeah, we don't have to talk about capstone. No, it was good. It was good. And I'm so glad that like we had that class together. I think like where we bonded a lot and
Yeah.
shared our struggles.
Travesties.
Travesties.
So everyone, Clara sent some amazing questions into the podcast, which is why she was one of our winners from our giveaway to come on. But it's really exciting to have you here. Clara and I met in college in our capstone class towards the later half through our program, which is so crazy to me that
It
we...
feels like we have been friends for so much longer. And it's honestly so funny too, because whenever I think about it, like I knew who you and Bianca were. Like you guys were like these exotic Italian sisters in the like that's like I knew of you, but it wasn't until Audrey was like, so you guys are gonna be friends, and we were like, oh, okay. And then it just like happened.
Because Audrey Kaminsky, PA of Artpop Talk, is the true puppet master, as we like to say. She just pulls the strings for us and we just do as she says. But I definitely remember that because you and Audrey took studio methods together, which for everyone listening is a class you take kind of halfway through the studio art program to kind of give you some guidelines as you're about to enter your review and so on and so forth. But Clara's dad is actually Jack Titus, who's an amazing watercolor professor at OSU. And so Clara and Audrey had that class together, and I rue the day I did not take that class with you guys.
I hadn't even thought about like how wild that would have been if like the 3 of us were in that class.
Jack would have not been able to handle it.
No. Honestly, it probably would have been good because I think like one of the reasons why Audrey and I bonded so much is because that class is all about talking about like what to expect from the program, but also it sort of guides you through like why do artists make art and what's the like, what's the real meaning behind your art and rather than a lot of things can just be like, oh, it's just pretty, but that's supposed to kind of just get you to scratch past the surface and really like dive deep. And I feel like Audrey and I were the only ones who wanted to have like philosophical conversations, and everyone else was like, okay, I'm ready to go.
Right.
So
yeah.
we bonded from the lack of participation in that class.
That's kind of how
Audrey's amazing.
Oh, absolutely. I feel like that is definitely how things go, though, in the studio program. Just speaking for OSU, but any other BFA students out there, feel free to chime in. I do feel like when you and like one other person, you're like, oh, that bitch is participating, like, so is that bitch. Like, so that's how you kind of start bonding.
Art classes can be super unique because art a lot of times can be very personal, and so if you are a student who's willing to like just put it all out there, and I am such an open book that it's never been an issue for me to just talk in front of crowds really about like personal stuff. And that class really did like I think like one of the prompts for that class for some sketches was like, what are you most ashamed of, what are you most proud of, questions like that you maybe wouldn't share with a complete stranger. So I think that was also something else that Audrey and I bonded over, is like we were sitting right next to each other by choice, but we were sitting right next to each other, and we were able to talk about these things that were like actually kind of personal, and it's just like it just snapped, like that's what we're talking about. So it
Yeah,
was it was a unique class. But
I love that. Well, I'm so glad that you're here today. I hate that I don't get to sit down next to you 3 hours a day on a Monday night and
I know.
talk about my terrible art and all the decisions that I have to make and redo. Those were the days. Oh my goodness. So for today's Art Pop Talk, inserting bubble sound, I am honored to get to ask the opinions and perspective of one of the Art Pop Tarts here on the podcast about how they feel about the pod, how they have been using it in their daily lives, and if Bianca and I are in fact fulfilling our goals of creating content that is applicable every day for your life, or somewhat applicable, at least I hope. So then in the last half of the segment, you all will get to know one of the Art Pop Tarts a little bit better, as we're going to talk about Clara's artistic practice, as well as some other amazing things that she's doing in regards to spreading information and awareness about local elections, local politics, and the presidential election. As we said,
Go.
it is voting day. If you were listening to this again on the way to your voting ballot, polling
Your
place.
polling place. Yeah, if you haven't already put that little ballot in the mail, you're probably on your way there. And yeah, just vote proudly.
I love it. I love it. So, Clara, I wanted to start today talking about the questions that you submitted on the pod about the complexity of nudity and how it can be interpreted or linked to pornography, which formulated a couple of ongoing discussions here about sexual bodies and post-human bodies, also in regards to Jen Johnson's work, who also was at our program with us. And I thought it would be wonderful to hear your perspective about the questions and what you thought also about our kind of ongoing conversation that we had as well. So I wanted to reiterate the question for everyone listening. Do you have any interesting experiences of nudity in art being complex or misinterpreted? Not every piece of art will be or has to be liked, but what would you say to folks who argue that nudity automatically equates to a piece of art to pornography? Is it at all harmful to the arts that work is interpreted this way, or is it more to of each their own kind of thing? So I'm interested to hear what you think, Clara.
So one incident kind of pops up into my mind. Okay, well, I'll start out with just from a young age, I've been like very aware of specifically nudity in the arts and people's perceptions of it. So growing up with my dad, who, yeah, he's the watercolor professor. He was the watercolor professor at OSU, but he also was the only professor that taught the life drawing class. And so there was that, but then also, people ask, so what does your mom do? What does your dad do? Just growing up, trying to get to know you whenever you go over to friends' houses and stuff. And so it's like, I'd always kind of try and skirt around the question because it was like a little bit awkward, and you never knew how parents were going to perceive that information. So whenever they'd ask, I'd say, oh yeah, he's a watercolor professor. And they're like, oh, so he paints watercolor. What does he paint? And is it landscapes or what, and I'd be like, oh, portraits for the most part. And they were like, oh, so like, what kind of portraits? And it's like, nude portraits. So yeah, it was interesting trying to explain my dad's profession to people who maybe weren't familiar with the arts. So he taught the life drawing class on campus, and of course that's with a nude model. And then if people would start getting kind of like interested in, well, what kind of art does he make? It was like, well, it's watercolor art. Well, is it landscapes, or what's he painting exactly? And it was difficult as a child to say eloquently like, oh, naked people, without, so it's like it was something. It's like my parents almost had to sit me down and explain, like, this is how you might explain it. So I've been very aware of just other people's perceptions of nudity in the arts, and I asked that question specifically to you, Gianna, because I know you've been sort of in three different perspectives of that. So you've been the model, you've been the creator, and then of course you've been the viewer. And so I just wondered what you thought about that. Like,
Yeah.
I know APT is all about inclusivity, and I wondered what your thoughts were on how to make nude art inclusive for maybe more conservative audiences, and whether or not that was even important to do.
Yeah. Well, I also thought the question was interesting because thinking about what you just said, we're comparing nudity, or does that automatically translate to pornography? But that question is so interesting, thinking of a broader, art historical lens, because there are some paintings, some portraits with women that are fully clothed, but they have a very provocative look on their face. And that's when we start getting engaged eye contact with the person in the portrait to the viewer. And those things are very highly sexualized and were used for the sake of being pornographic, but they were still, to our eyes, fully clothed. So yeah, it's interesting. And I think I may have talked about this kind of experience before when we had our Kiki Smith exhibition at the OSUMA, and how we would have families walk through the exhibit, or they would ask me before they walk through, oh, so is there any nudity? Like, do I need to be aware of anything before I bring my children in? Which is an absolutely fair and valid question. But what I would say was, there is nudity in this exhibition, but there is nothing sexual, and it is purely anatomical, which is correct. You did have close-up images of the human body, such as like genitalia or of like the anus, but you also had a sculpture of a woman giving birth, and there's nothing particularly sexual about the way that those anatomical representations were being displayed. So
It's interesting because there really can be, like, you can have a very erotic piece of art that has no nudity, and then a very just
mm-hmm.
wholesome piece of art
Mm-hmm.
that has a lot of nudity. So yeah, it is interesting.
Anyways, Clara, those were fantastic questions, and it led for like an ongoing discussion. So hot take.
No, I'm glad you guys took those. You had some, definitely interesting perspectives to share.
So one other question I wanted to ask you in regards to the podcast was, from my perspective, even though Artpop Talk is my biggest outlet currently that has helped me stay connected and be able to be involved in the art world and my local arts community here, but as the maker, I feel, or have felt, some isolation of being disconnected to art and not having, actively this group of people, not working with a group of people, not being able to actively play and plan exhibitions, et cetera, et cetera. So my hope in starting Artpop Talk, especially in the midst of this pandemic, was to not only keep those connections strong for myself, but to also create connections for other people. So I was curious if you have been able to discuss the podcast with any other people, and do you feel like you could perhaps benefit from a conversation or a digital platform or group where other kind of art pop talks could partake in a larger, conducive conversation?
Yeah, so I definitely feel for you on that. It really is like, you kind of take for granted always being surrounded by other young artists. Always the topic is art. And so yeah, I definitely feel for you with the just not having that community anymore that we did whenever we were in school. It really is sort of a cold turkey just cut off, and you do kind of take for granted always being surrounded by young artists and just really interesting conversations about art. And so I was honestly so excited whenever you guys decided to make this podcast, because it was filling that void for me that I, you know, at first I didn't even know I was like missing as much as I was until I started hearing your guys' precious voices and just talking about really interesting things. And it's like, man, I really miss hearing about this stuff. And you know, some of it is just an extension, I would say, of some conversations we have had before, or you know, that you've had in like academe in the arts, but also like you guys do so much just great research and bring up artists that I've never heard of before, and I'm so glad to look up and learn more about. So no, I haven't really been able to have that, and so it's been nice to have that. But as far as like having another platform where maybe the Pop Tarts could like get more involved, I will say there are so many times where you guys have an episode where I'm like, oh, I want to continue this conversation, you know, I want to hear other people's perspectives and keep talking to you guys about it, you know. Or it's like I'll have a question and it's like, I can't really ask them, you know, sometimes I forget you guys aren't there and I'm like just in a room by myself. But it's like, it would be interesting if there was some sort of platform we could communicate.
Yeah, I I would really love that. And I think the goal obviously is for the podcast to expand. And I am part of other podcasts, or in the past have been part of other kind of subgroups or Facebook groups where those conversations can take place. Because as much as we say, you know, on the podcast, you email us our questions, email us your thoughts, which we absolutely do want. We want to be able to share that. It is, I feel, a lot more convenient and a lot of ways a lot more fulfilling to also have other people and other perspectives, because right now people send in their commentary and then again they're just getting our response or our feedback. But also me and Bianca don't have all the answers to every single question all the time too. And more perspectives and more dialogue, I think, is the goal too. So I think that's gonna be in the works, you know. As much as I like to think I have a super big fan base right now, I'm not too sure, but
Please, you do.
So Clara, I really want to know, as an art pop tart, what your favorite episode has been.
Okay, so I had to think about it because basically all of them. If I'm being honest, I was really, really impressed with your episode on Black art and protest art. Once again, I just thought you guys did such a great job with the research behind that. And I remember I listened to it while I was running, and I remember actually stopping in the run and like writing down some names, like just in my notes on my phone, because I was like, wow, I need to hold on to that. I need to pay attention to that. You introduced a whole bunch of artists that I just hadn't heard of. And so I thought that was just a really well put together episode. But if I'm being honest, the Bumble Boys episode had me cackling. Like, I was laughing so hard. You guys really served some tea, and I am a thirsty little Pop-Tart for that tea. That was such, yeah, no, I love when you two sisters just start like laughing and going at it. And yeah, no, there was some tea on that episode.
There was some tea. Yeah, sometimes Bianca and I have a tendency to just kind of pop off and we get distracted.
No, but I love those moments. I love those moments.
Oof. Well, you know, it's funny you talk about listening to the Black Art and Protest episode while you were running, because when Bianca came back to Oklahoma to quarantine with us, she was here for 3 months. And so we had that 3 months to really have these detailed conversations. And since neither of us have access to a gym anymore, we were going for walks like every day during the summer. And we were going for our like usual probably like Tuesday walk, and you know, it was just, we were dying to do that episode from the beginning, because Clara, like, you know, the critique drama that happens, and oh, you know that I don't put up with that bullshit. Like that was a doozy for me.
I feel like you should have people just like send in like those who did go to school for the arts, just like their most like intense like critique moments, because I feel like anyone who did go to school and like did take classes where there were critiques, we all have one that like sticks out in our head, and I think that could be a
Oh,
very interesting episode.
I love that. I don't,
Critique drama.
the drama.
The drama.
I live for the critique tea. Holy shit, that's a fantastic idea.
My dad tells this story about just this like hard ass professor that he had back in the day. And the professor would have everyone pin up their work that they had spent hours and hours on. And then he would slowly come up and like really look at each piece. And then he would take them down, take the push pins down, and just walk over the pieces as he started like looking at the other ones. And then he'd leave like maybe two up, and the rest of them were just on the floor, and he was walking on them. And it's
Savage.
like, it was savage. Like, I was like, Dad, oh my God, you would get fired for doing that now.
Oh
And
my
he was
gosh.
like, he was saying he swears like he saw people like tear up. Like, I so would. Oh my God, like what an asshole move. But I guess it makes you work hard, you know? Like, you don't want your piece to be trampled.
I guess. Trample over my heart, why don't you? Man, I remember though, as you said, Jack taught life drawing, and I just need to say that, my God, I know that everyone dreaded taking that class, and that was one of the most nerve-wracking things that you can do as a person that doesn't have any experience working with the figure and you're just thrown into it. But holy crap, I have never seen myself progress in the way that I did than I did in life drawing in regards to 2D art.
The figure is really complicated and really intimidating, and it's one of those things where it's like you I think anyone can look at a drawing and you know, you can just see something's just slightly off on the drawing. It's the uncanny valley kind of thing that happens, and that happens so much more when you're drawing a figure than if you're drawing a cup or something. You can just tell like, oh, their eyes feel off. I don't know why. It might be they're too close together, they're too big for that, you know, whatever. If you're trying to make it look true to life, you know, which isn't always important, I might add. And that's something I had to get over, is having just like photorealistic drawings. But I think when you're first coming into a program, I think a lot of people have to kind of get over that like, oh, if I can't draw it perfectly, then I'm a trash artist, you know, which just is not true. But yeah.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I feel that. But it was incredible. I mean, I remember, I think it's also just the hype of it all, like as you pointed out, and especially in our program, the older students sometimes, you know, they lead the younger impressionable students, and oh my God, like get ready for life drawing, like you have to take it at 6:30 to 9:30, like get ready, bitch. And I'm like, it was fucking fine, like it was fantastic. And did I get extremely nervous when Jack would come up behind me and like stare at my drawing? Like absolutely. But I've never seen myself progress so fast in the way that I did, and I am so appreciative for that, especially now in 3D art. Even though I'm working with the human figure, so learning how it works in two-dimensional reality is extremely helpful. You know, those two bridges like merge together, and they're not as separate as I think people think that they are. So anyways, thank you, Jack, for not trampling over my trash art.
He would never. He would never.
I would be the first though. Okay, so I am curious as well how you think the structure of the podcast has been working. How do you feel about some of the segments we've done, such as Josh Thoughts, having him on, and or even the art news segments that we've been that we have been having at the beginning of each podcast?
So I love the art news. Honestly, I'm just going to sound like I'm pandering to you, but I literally love everything that you guys have done. And I think
well,
mentioned even just like from the first episode to now, like how much like you guys have just progressed, and I'm honestly so proud of you guys. I know that sounds weird coming from a peer, but like I'm just so impressed with the podcast, and it really is sort of like, you know, I listen to NPR for my news, and you know, I've got these other podcasts to keep me updated on this or that, and you guys, you know, are holding your ground. Like, you know, like I love APT, and I love that you're bringing on, and you just, it's so clear you guys have a community of really artists, but people that care about you, that are excited to be on the podcast. And you know, I know Sid did the graphics for APT. I honestly love the Josh Thoughts thing. I loved the introduction and everything, and learning about him being a, is he a band instructor? Is that right?
Yes, so Josh has a master's in music and emphasis in percussion. He's a fantastic musician, but he is in a progressive death metal band.
Discordia, yeah, no.
Discordia. Did you get your Discordia merch? I would like to point out, Josh, if you're watching, which you're probably not, but I'm wearing your Discordia shirt. Representing APT brother-in-law over here.
No, I thought it was really, you know, because you and Bianca really come from more of like a visual arts background, and I think it is important. Like, obviously, we stan a Lady Gaga queen, and
of course,
you guys, you know, are very informed on that. But it is, I think, good to have some performing arts background weaved in. So I love that he's on there, and I am a former percussionist myself, so I kind of bonded with that.
Clara, you know? We've talked about this before, because you know that I am also a former / failed percussionist.
Yeah, weren't you bells or marimba or?
Yes,
I don't remember.
Yes,
I can't read either. That's why I played snare and quads. Like, I see the little notes and I just play the little notes, but I don't know anything about.
Horrible at reading music, horrible. Like, it just never happened for me. And Josh, oh my gosh, Josh, thank you for still even talking to me, because in middle school he would try to give me lessons, and it just never stuck for me. But wow, I forgot about that. Wow, 2 failed percussion queens over here. Okay, so another question is, which I probably know the answer to, but would you like to hear more from PA, Miss Audrey Kaminsky, on the podcast? Because she is just running the show behind the scenes, doing the most. But how would you feel about her coming on more?
Yes, I absolutely would love to hear more from her. I adore her. I know she's in high demand. She's a very, very busy young woman. But yeah, I mean, just because I do kind of, I mean, I know you guys already, and so I'm just like in love with Audrey and you and all of your guys' dynamics. So I think it would be great to have just yet another brilliant young woman, educated young woman on the podcast. Yeah, no, we definitely need to have more of Audrey.
Yeah, that
I'm speaking for all of the Pop Tarts. We need more Audrey.
I respect it.
And also, I think we talked about this last night a little bit, but I'm boycotting APT if we do not get a drunk art history episode. It has to happen, okay? It has to happen.
Okay. Here's the thing. I am down for that. I am very much always down for a good drunk art history. But let's just think about how we'll, you know, be showing this, because Claire, you're kind of also like perp turt guinea pig today as we're doing the Zoom call. But imagine just like the shittiest, most dysfunctional Zoom call you've ever watched, with me and Bianca just getting hammered talking about feminist nonsense. Like, because that is the content you will be receiving.
You know, that's what editing is for, okay?
Me editing at like 1 a.m. Like,
or maybe a bonus episode or something, you know, where it's only like, you know, 15-20 minutes or something.
Okay. Well, speaking of bonus episodes, are you familiar with like Patreon?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Bianca and I, and this is something that probably is the goal for APT in the long run, but thinking of other things like bonus segments, bonus videos, things like that, is that something that you feel like as an Art Pop Tart you would like to have a subscription potentially to a Patreon channel and have access to those kind of fun extra content and ridiculous things?
Yeah, absolutely. And so last night we talked about that too. You know, like you said, we're kind of testing out this Zoom call thing, but I would love to actually get to see the faces of the people you're interviewing, or just you and Bianca, you know, like
Yeah.
I love the moments when you guys like are talking about something and then you start laughing and start giggling and I'm like, man, I wish I could see that, you know, or just like your reactions when you're like, no, no, absolutely not. Like, I want to see your face whenever you're saying these things, or, you know, so yeah, no, I think absolutely.
Wonderful. Kind of in regards to more video content as well, that's something that's probably been the hardest thing to do during this pandemic, because we want to have more in-person interviews. And we talked about in the beginning of APT, kind of reinventing the Khan Academy style of things, where they're able to physically go to museums and have these interviews or talks in front of the artwork. And we've been able to do that at the OSU Museum of Art and the Oklahoma City Museum of Art, but because traveling is so hard right now, that's been something that hasn't necessarily been put on the back burner, but you know, there are
It's
other ways that we can bring
yeah.
in people that's a little bit more safe. But I also think that is some future content that's also on the agenda.
And something else you have to think about is you guys do such a good job with linking all of your resources and explaining like the important aspects of the image you might be talking about or the piece. But it is visual content that you guys are speaking on for the most part. And so I think it could be nice. You know, I know with Zoom, for example, you can share your screen. And so you could put up the image you're talking about, and then
Yeah.
we can see exactly what you're talking about in the middle of the conversation, you know?
Yeah.
So that can be helpful too.
All right. So, everyone, we are going to take a short break. But before we break, Clara, I must ask you, what would you put in your mother loving flex kit?
So with my work, it's the bones are normally on the wall, or, you know, just really not in a place where you can be handling them. And I think one of my favorite things about making my work is inspecting the bones. And I don't think a lot of people spend time, you know, just like holding bones and feeling them, but the textures and just the different angles. And I sound like such a weirdo, but like I you're like, yes, absolutely, yeah, you sound like a weirdo.
What are you
But
doing, Clara?
no, so I think bones, and I don't know how I would like make it into like a interactive. I just maybe like
But I think
having
even,
for people to, I don't
yeah,
know.
what you said though, but also, as I like to point out, I said I would just put like trash in my flex kit because I use a bunch of trash to cast. But even just what you said, it's your flex kit and feeling those textures and also putting bones together that wouldn't typically match in the original anatomy of the animal, but making
Yeah.
them fit together for your piece, you know, that's part of like your process.
And that's the thing that like I think is so interesting about Flux Kids is I think it gets the viewer kind of in the headspace of the artist. And so it would be interesting, you know, you look at it as just a pile of bones, but whenever I promise all of you guys, if you just pick up a pile of bones and start playing with it, you're going to get a really cool sculpture. So, you know, it's
What are you telling the art pop tarts, Clara? My God.
get these bones not in a malicious way. Can I just like, yeah, let it be known that I'm not like out murdering animals or anything. These are all,
Little disclaimer flashes across the screen.
yeah. I probably sound like such a weirdo if you don't know my work. Just go gather bones, folks.
Oh my gosh. All right, everyone, we will be back with some more hot tea for you all in just a couple minutes. Hello, welcome back, everybody. I assume now you are driving back from your polling place. Yes, if you're feeling anxiety while listening to this, it's your polling place. And please, please, please share your photos. I want to see some cute APTs out in the wild. So one reason why Bianca and I also wanted to have you, Clara, on the podcast as a featured listener is because this girl is out here literally doing the most. I'm so freaking proud of her. And I just want to share all these amazing things that you're doing for local politics and the presidential election. So you have been sharing and creating helpful and accessible information and infographics and other forms of digital media about voting information. And we just want to know more about your involvement in local politics and how this project kind of got started for you.
Yeah, so I think it really kind of began at the beginning of the summer during all of the Black Lives Matter protests. I kind of just felt like, during COVID, I have been living with my parents or living at my parents' house for like the last couple of months and, was in contact with them a lot. So I didn't feel comfortable being out on the streets, standing up next to everyone at the protest. So I felt like, okay, what can I do right now? So I started phone banking for Greg Robinson for mayor and in Tulsa. And I started looking just at the elections coming up. So there was an election, I believe it was on June 25th. And I saw the different candidates going up for senator, and not a single one of them had anything on their platforms talking about racial injustice, had anything speaking on anything of that matter. And I was honestly just shocked. So I was like, we are going to get some information on this. So I reached out to every single one of the candidates, and they were probably like, who the fuck is this girl? So I only actually had interviews with a couple of them, but it was nice to get that information. I got it on just some palatable infographics because people don't like to read shit, and you need to know who you were voting for, and it's important to read this stuff. I'm sorry guys, sometimes you got to take the time and read stuff, whether you like it or not. But I thought it was a good way.
I can't make all the art. You've got to read sometimes.
But social media is so huge and it's a visual platform. So I mean, we're all guilty of like, you see something that's more than 3 sentences and you're like, scrolling past that. No, not about it. But I figured if I could make it on something that was visually pleasing and just could kind of make it short and sweet, then I felt like I could like maybe spread the word. And then I was really surprised that first infographic kind of went like mini viral in Oklahoma. A lot of people were sharing it, and I got a lot of good feedback on that. And so I just thought, at the time I didn't have a job. I'm working remotely now, but I was like, what better thing to be doing with my time than just getting the information out? So that's whenever I started, just getting dates and deadlines out for elections and when you need to apply for absentee ballots, or, I think it was October 9th was the last day to register to vote. So just this really important information that I knew we were going to be bombarded with, but, that's what I can be doing to help. So that's what I was focusing my energy on. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm just still like blown away by everything that you did. And I think for anyone that is looking for ways to get involved in canvassing for their politician of choice, I think that this was a very safe and also accessible way and beneficial way for you and for the people involved to get that information. So I've just seen how it has affected people as someone who's also absorbing the information that you've shared. So you're out here doing the most, and I am so appreciative. And I'm also curious if you have, I know it's hard to see the impact of the work that you're doing, but have you gotten any kind of feedback from people outside of your bubble that you've been able to kind of interact with?
Yeah. So, social media is really kind of just like an echo chamber. You're just getting your own opinions fed back to you. And so I was like, okay, I'm really not going to make it, partisan at all. And so I think that's when I started getting the feedback, was whenever I was putting out this information instead of like these links to, clickbait to Trump did this, Biden did that, whatever. People just want the information, and that's what I was putting out there. And so I had a lot of people just say, hey, thank you, I didn't know about this deadline coming up. Or, sometimes there are things that are, I think, have to do with voter suppression. Oklahoma did not make voting easy. It's not easy. It's complicated. You have to read through things. Sometimes you have to reread them and you're like, wait, what? I called my county election board probably 5 or 6 times in the last 2 months just to clarify things. And so I did. I had certain people just say, hey, I don't know who else to ask. Like, is this how you do that? And then I've had a few people just say, hey, thanks. So
Yeah.
I'm one person, and I'm not going to change the world with a little infographic, but I thought, if I could get one person to register to vote, or make sure one person is like dedicated to getting their ballot in the mail, then I felt like I did something.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Or like, I mean, you can literally type in anyone's name and you can, depending on where they're registered, you can find that information for them and you can send it to them. So even making the effort for someone else, especially a caretaker, uh, any kind of caretaker, a mom or a parent, a dad, anybody, I think that has been a really huge part of voter suppression as well, is not offering that flexibility for any kind of parental figure or caretaker. So if it means today that someone can't go out and vote because they have to watch their child or someone else's child, please take the time to help them out if you have that privilege, because it can make such a big difference. And it's incredibly important to help everybody out during today. So
this is a very, very important election.
yeah. So, Claire, we are about to get into your work, and we have just gotten through October. Bianca and I did episodes on hauntology, on monster theory, on the exhibition and display of human anatomy or bones on display. So let's get into the bones of it all. How did the bones become a part of your sculptural practice? And can you speak further about the use of bones and this exploration of your internal landscape, but also external landscape at the time? And then please just give the listeners kind of an overview of your concept.
Yeah. Okay. So start off with, I do want to give people some context. I'm not hunting these animals. I'm harvesting these bones just from a plot of land that I grew up camping on. My dad actually grew up on that property. It's 250 acres, and it's woodland and grassland, and it's just animals that are passing away from natural causes. So I do want to just put that out there. I'm not doing it. So we also run cattle on that property, and that's actually where I get a lot of the bones from. When a cow dies, they just leave it there, and then I get to make art out of it. So just some disclaimer there, I'm not killing animals. I would never. But so yeah, it actually kind of started out, I would say, the bone concept, I don't really remember like where that came from, because it's all really progressed into what the work is now. But I know, my dad, he had just weird collections of like, I don't know, different spine bones and antlers. And so just growing up as a kid, I think I was interested in that too. So I'm sure that kind of, you know, followed me into the arts that I was making. But the first bone sculpture I made actually wasn't made out of bone. It was ceramics that I was making to look like bones. And
Right.
it was kind of like this weird like bone tower. And I think the
It,
assignment,
it
it was
was
an
like
assignment.
this, right? Yeah.
It was like a bone Christmas tree, if you will. It was, and it was just an assignment in ceramics, and I think it was really to try and get us to be more confident in making larger works. So it was 3 feet high, and was my big project, and it fell over a million times. So I was like, okay, we are not doing this with ceramics anymore. What's an easier way to do this? And so Brandon Reese, the ceramic professor, we were talking about, okay, how can we do this? And he suggested maybe making molds, like bone molds, because I said, well, I've got some bones, just like a bone collection. I know it's kind of odd, but I have collected just bones off of the plot of land over the years, and I thought, well, maybe I'll just use the actual bones. And he was like, well, don't you think you'll run out? And I was like, no, there's a lot of animals out there, like they'll keep on. So that's where I get the bones, the concept behind my work. So it's large scale sculpture work, a lot of time mounted onto a wall. It's a combination of bones. Just for the listeners, I know you've seen my work and are familiar with it, but it's mostly cow bones that are kind of arranged into different shapes and patterns, and then they are alongside these little ceramic flowers that I make. So that's where the ceramics part of my work comes in to play. And the concept behind my work is really just sort of, I think I was having a hard time thinking about just like, how am I going to manage like the death of my loved ones? I know that sounds like, but it's something we all have to think about. And it was something that I was noticing was it's like I was getting more and more anxious about. I'm so close with my family. Relationships are just so important to me, as they are for a lot of people, but it was something really hard for me to deal with. So I started kind of diving into it a little bit more. And that's kind of when I got more into like mindfulness and being in the moment and seeing that how we are all connected and all that kind of, I know it sounds foo-foo, but so that's really where the work has gone. Is it's really like a coping mechanism for me to sort of remind myself that yes, we all die, but there's a lot of beauty in the life that was, and it continues on past death. And that's really what my work is supposed to represent. It's supposed to be a comforting reminder that yes, we do all die, but it's very natural, and we'll have these people with us for the rest of our life. And after I die, it'll, I'll leave behind the legacy of hopefully my many beautiful kids that I'll have one day, even though I'm super single. But I know that I have touched lives. I know that, my friends and family have touched my life, and that lives on past the very scary thought of us not being here anymore. So that's really what my work is about. So as scary and morbid and kind of weird the whole bones thing is, I think it can be very striking to see something that's organic that we know we have, and that's not, we're not looking at our bones all the time, but I think it kind of grasps you into the reality of like, we are going to die, but it's okay,
Right.
So.
Right. Clara, as I know, and we've talked about on the podcast before, we have ideas in still lives or in like traditional painting. It pops up these little memento mores, reminders of death, little hidden symbols everywhere. But yours isn't even a little hidden symbol. That's the whole concept of your work. Your work is so beautiful. And although I think it's fair to say that there's works out there that contemporary works that deal with death in a very healthy or constructive way. You also know that I'm a big proponent of talking about the sculptural process as being, just as important as the final piece. So even though we were joking about it earlier in regards to your flux kit, I think that idea of you also collecting and harvesting these objects on the land that not only you grew up on, but that your father grew up on. I mean, that is a really big deal. And I don't think your work would have necessarily had that same original impact on you in the beginning and wanting to explore this if you were just out in some land that you didn't feel this deep connection to. I don't know if you would have been encouraged to explore this concentration in the way that you have.
Yeah, and that's something else that I might bring up. I remember growing up camping on that property, but the Savannah Cemetery is right across the street. And actually that, the series we're talking about, the work we're talking about is called the Savannah series. And my sister's name is Savannah. So a few of my friends were like, what's that about? Are you just obsessed with your sister dying? I was like, no.
I kind of feel that though, if you were like very similar vibes.
I get where people are going with that, but no. So it's just that area, that property that my dad grew up on, but then the cemetery is right across the street, and so there was always this sort of just awareness that, like, my ancestors back several generations are on that property, and then I camp and then I go visit, and it was all kind of tied together. And then you're right, like harvesting those bones on that property. Just every time I'm there, I'm normally with my dad. I'm normally hearing, childhood stories of his about him being on that property. It is really all tied together, hearing about my ancestors, hearing about my dad, and then making my own experiences, and then making art out of the animals that are on that property. Yeah, it is definitely kind of the whole life cycle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So other than, I think, your process being extremely meditative for you as the maker, there's something that's very calming and relaxing about your artwork that I think definitely fuels your investigation and your outlook about the universal concept of death. And we have linked images to your work and they've been posted, so hopefully everyone has had a chance to look at them. If you haven't, go look at them now, pull them up on Instagram. But even your composition, especially the one with the circle in it, I'm curious, with the ceramic flowers and the color choices, how long did it take you to kind of draw those conclusions or make those decisions about the color choices you wanted to make?
I'm trying to bring the life back into, or the beauty back into, the concept of death. And what better way than to have these little sprouts of flowers kind of incorporated into everything. And that was sort of the idea, is like, how can I make these bones look less morbid and be comforting and tell people, like, it's okay, there's still something beautiful that's coming out of this kind of scary thing. So that's why the flowers are even there. And then, like I said, they're modeled after the dogwood blossom, which is typically white or kind of a light pink, and that's the color of the blossoms. But that was actually, so it's almost like the work kind of is broken up into two different processes, finding the bones and then putting them together. They're really kind of unique shapes, and so that's one part of it. And the other part is, you saw that piece that I had that was kind of on the floor, and it was hundreds of those blossoms. And that just took hours and hours and hours of doing the same repetitive thing of making those blossoms. And I just got to zone out and just like be, sometimes I wouldn't even listen to music. It would just be complete silence, and it would just me doing the same thing over and over. And it was really meditative and really calming. So it was a lot of fun making the blossoms. I did most of them in a salt kiln, which is always sort of a surprise to those who aren't familiar. It's a gas kiln that you then throw salt in, and it causes the glazes to have just different reactions and different textures. And so I never really knew how the blossoms were going to come out. It wasn't like an electric kiln where I knew it was going to be a perfectly white blossom or a perfectly pink, so
Right.
It was always kind of a fun little surprise. So
yeah. So I know that you listened to the Hauntology episode, but I am curious. I think the work that Bianca and I have examined on the pod in regards to hauntology has that idea of being more that idea of kind of stereotype of hauntedness, something is like eerie or creepy, or we have this kind of unease feeling. But I think with the bones in your work and the concept of death, there are those aspects of haunted imagery within it, especially about the life cycle, and your process of being on this land where your dad grew up, where your family grew up. But it's not the idea of hauntedness in a way that is creepy or making us feel like uncomfortable. It's like an idea of comfort. And I think your work is very also inclusive in that way, as we all know when you're talking about a subject like death, everybody has a different perspective on it based off their background, you know, their orientation, their religion, their spirituality, what may have you. But I think your work allows for those different interpretations as well.
It, I would definitely say it's supposed to be confrontational, but then also it's like it's coming at you and then taking a step back and letting you sort of like contemplate. You know, it's
Mm-hmm.
like, remember, we're all gonna die. All of us are gonna die. Okay, but wait, is that so scary? You know, that's sort of the point, because I think I kind of needed to do that for myself, because I was having a lot of like moments where I would just like, okay, but I'm not going to think about that. I'm not going to think about that. And it's so much healthier to just work through it and think about it and prepare yourself, and it's okay and it's beautiful and it's going to be fine. And you know, yeah, that's kind of it, it's not supposed to be scary, kind of like what you're saying, you know. It's supposed to be maybe a little confrontational, like
Right.
confronting you,
Right.
but yeah, it's just something that we all have to deal with. And you know,
You're the one making it happen for us, which we appreciate. So Clara, I just kind of wanted to hear about some of the artists that you studied while making this work and while in the program.
yeah, so we've kind of already talked about this before. The work is really, really personal to me. And so I was kind of guilty of not doing a lot of like research and like looking into like maybe other artists who were maybe even just making aesthetically similar work. But of course, the more I did, the more I think I got out of my own work and was able to add to my own work. But I was really happy that you guys talked about Anna Mendieta. So she had a lot of that, it was like body and earth work, and
Right.
there was a lot of like the natural. And with her stuff, she also used Santeria aspects too. So there was the blood, there were, you know, the feathers there, you know, so a lot of like nature, but then also it was very personal. So
Mm-hmm.
I got a lot of just maybe, I wouldn't say it's aesthetically similar, but I would say conceptually there were some undertones that I really resonated with in her work. And
Yeah.
then I don't know if you're familiar with Rachel Kneebone. She is a ceramicist. She, I think, only really works with porcelain, but they're these just really beautiful, intricate. She has smaller pieces, but the ones that I think she's gotten a lot of attention for are these just massive. It's, man, it's hard to explain. They're very intricate, like little body parts that make a huge tower, kind of Dante Inferno, like arms. And but from afar they just look, it looks like lace or something. It's like this
Oh,
white lace. And I think aesthetically, maybe not quite as much conceptually, I really just loved her work. And that's kind of, you know, all my work is why I've always kind of wanted the bones to sort of translate as like large scale lace, if that makes any sense. And so I would say Rachel Kneebone, Frida Kahlo. I know that's low hanging fruit, but we gotta love Frida.
gotta love
Um,
Frida. Well, so Clara, your work is on display currently at AHA in Tulsa. And so for anybody in the Oklahoma area, you can go visit some of Clara's work currently. Clara, how long is that exhibition up for?
I believe it's going to be up it'll be up through December 19th, I
All
think.
right.
And there's so many amazing artists. If you've got the time, definitely go take a look. They did a great job with that show. So
Yeah. Well, Clara, thank you so much for coming on here and giving us your viewpoint as a cutest art pop tart. And thank you so much for sharing your work with us today. I adore your work. I adore you. And thank you for supporting me and for being on here.
yes, thanks for having me. I love APT. Obsessed.
Well,
Obsessed.
obsessed with you. And I promise I will try to make a drunk art history. I just
I am here for it. I'm here for it.
need to mentally prepare for the public shame, but it'll be worth it.
I don't care in the moment, though.
True.
That's the beauty of it.
Oh my gosh. All right, everyone. As usual, you can follow us on all social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. You can listen to us anywhere podcasts can be found. And you can go follow Clara's work at Clara Titus Art, correct?
Yes.
Clara Titus Art on Instagram, and check out her website as well. And we will link that for you all in the resources. So we will talk to you later. Happy Election Day, everyone. Let's
Go
get
vote. Go vote.
through this day.